Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Saturday edition of the Fantasy and Frames Fantasy Football Pregame Show. I'm your host, Jorge Edwards. Obviously, we do this on Sundays, starting at 9:30 a.m. But we thought, with three games on the slate tonight or today here over for week 15 of the Fantasy Football Playoffs. First round. We thought, let's get you all the coverage we can. Let's cover all the games today. And of course, giving you the fantasy relevance of all these players, both on offense and for IDP. And then, of course, we'll be back tomorrow morning covering the rest of the slate for the rest of the weekend. So really excited here to welcome in Jonathan Klanowski. How are things across the pond, Jonathan?
Yeah, all good, all good. I'm loving this today. Having 3 random NFL games just to start off my weekend. It's World Cup final in there tomorrow. I'm sitting on the sofa all weekend.
There's all sorts of awesome football content. However, whether you're overseas or you're here, there's football. It's exciting. Round one of the playoffs here. I think one of the big lessons we can take away from fantasy football this year is it's truly been a game of attrition, more so a game of talent and luck here. It's like, okay, how well did you construct your roster? How well have you been managing your depth on your roster this year? So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be tricky, but this is the time to really invest. Put your best foot forward, obviously, and try to advance to the next round. And it's super exciting. Are you having any pivotal matchups here this Saturday in terms of players?
Well, no, because I've got a bye week in most of my leagues. I don't know about you.
Ooh, well, look at you. We have a bye. We have a.
Well, actually, I'll be honest. The most important league I do have a bye week in, which is the Fantasy and Frames Staff League, which came down to I was in fourth going into.
You and I were scheduled to meet up, I believe.
Yeah, and Nate lost his matchup, I think, only by like a point or something like that because of the DeAndre Hopkins fumble, I think, which meant that I jumped 2 places into second. So that's my most important one. But no, I've got a couple of big games this weekend as well.
I just am seeing right now, Nate and I are squaring off in round one. He is up 13 points, but I'm projected to win. We will see how that works out. But congratulations on the first round bye in the staff league. For all those out there who are participating in our charity tournament, the 4-Ed Championship, first of all, thank you. It's great to have you all excited and participating. We announced all the division players who are advancing to the playoffs on Twitter. So super excited to get that going. Obviously, it's all for a good cause. And let's just jump into it, man. We got, of course, for folks who are listening and watching, we'll answer your start-sit questions just like we do on Sunday. Literally just covering these 3 games, answering your start and sit questions, and then, go enjoy football. Let's start here at the first game here on Saturday, the 1 p.m. matchup, the Colts and the Vikings. This, I think, should be fun. If you had to pick one particular player here, and we can go player by player, let's start with offense. Who's one that you're excited to see this week for the Colts and or Vikings?
So I think Michael Pittman is a really interesting one for me. I was really high on him coming into the year, and he's just not quite hit the heights that we hoped. I mean, if you look at his average depth of target, it's fallen off massively this year. So I was looking into this morning. It was 10.3 last year. It's down to 6.9 this year. I think he's only scored 1 or 2 touchdowns. But this is a really good opportunity to have a bounce back game. I think he was listed as a potential start candidate in my start and sit article this week. We've seen how poor that Vikings defense can be. I mean, Goff threw for something like 330 yards last week. Right. So Michael Pittman is one that I'm really interested to see if he can have a bounce back game this week.
So it's interesting. He's going to be lining up against cornerback Duke Shelley tonight for the most part, or this afternoon for the most part. I'd say out of all the matchups here, whether we're looking at Pittman, Pierce, or Campbell, kind of has the second easiest one. Shelley is allowing a 64.7% passer rating. He's allowing a high NFL passer rating, and then 64.7% reception percentage. So yeah, definitely. I think he has some upside here. The matchup I'm looking forward to, however, is Alec Pierce versus Patrick Peterson. I think this could be a big Alec Pierce game. Peterson is allowing a reception percentage of 80%, which that's ridiculous. Like, how is he letting all these players catch the ball so much? And he's allowing a lot of yards after the catch. That's also great for the upside for Alec Pierce. I think for me, it's two different things you want out of these receivers, or you should be expecting. I think with Alec Pierce, you're looking at the yardage totals upside. More so with Pittman, and versus Pittman, you're looking at the receptions upside. Although it's crazy. You look back at the past couple of weeks that they've been playing. You go back to week 13, Alec Pierce had 8 targets for around 17 points. Week 12, it was Pittman with 11 targets with 16 points. So it really is matchup based here. But, the Colts are going to be down Kenny Moore. They're shuffling in a free safety. I'll get to a safety when we're talking about IDP for a second here for the Colts that I'm kind of interested in for IDP purposes for the right/wrong reasons. And I know that's very cryptic. I'll get to that. I'm actually, over in our article Chasing Upside for week 15 over at fantasyandframes.com, I'm actually really high on Matt Ryan this week. You look back at the past 3 quarterbacks that faced the Vikings: Jared Goff, Mike White, Mac Jones. In this order: Jared Goff, 26.2 points; Mike White, 19.7 points; Mac Jones, 23.3 points. If Mac Jones can get you 23.3 points against this Vikings defense, which the past 3 weeks has been a sieve for fantasy production, I feel like Matt Ryan and his weapons here, are in a good spot.
It's an interesting one because obviously we're through all of our bye weeks now. So there isn't anyone that's sort of that's you're having to tick because of a bye week. But you might have been rolling with Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray who are going to be out. So there will be people out there who need a spot start, and I think you can do a lot worse than Ryan. As you said, he's it's a great matchup. My worry is that he's only scored more than 20 points once this season.
Right.
But if there's going to be a matchup that he's going to do it, then I think it'll be this one. I think Cousins could be in for a decent day as well. I mean, he's got 2 of his starting offensive linemen back today as well, the left tackle and the center. The left tackle, Darosor, is definitely back. The center, I think, is questionable, but I think had limited practice all of this week. So that's obviously big for him as well. I think they're both sort of decent streaming options today.
Yeah, so for my rankings over at Fantasy Frames, I have Cousins at 9 and I have Ryan at 14. So definitely here's the thing. If you're starting Matt Ryan because of injury, well, then you're already tempering your expectations for the quarterback position, because at the end of the day, who do you have left to take that spot? But like you just said, matchup here works really well. Going to Cousins here, obviously Justin Jefferson, you're starting. Obviously he's matchup proof here. I think Adam Thielen has the potential for a big game this week. I actually wouldn't be surprised if KJ Osborne gets in on the action here for those who are looking for a deeper play. Kenny Moore, the slot quarterback, is out. Julian Blackmon at free safety has been moving in to the slot coverage role, so kind of playing a little bit out of position here. I think could benefit KJ Osborne. Flipping to the IDP side and how this impacts offense. So when I was looking over the past month as far as targets go to defensive backs for the Colts, one name just kept on coming up, and that's Rodney McLeod, who over the past month has basically been the most targeted defensive back on Indianapolis for good and bad reasons. Good reasons for the Vikings receivers, because he's allowing the highest NFL passer rating when targeted, which is not great for a defensive player. He's literally been picked apart, and which is crazy that they're targeting a strong safety who normally plays closer to the line of scrimmage. But he's a liability. And so you have, Justin Jefferson, or you have Adam Thielen. More so Adam Thielen this week, I feel like, just because he's more of a short to intermediate receiving option versus the downfield threat that Justin Jefferson is. So definitely has some mismatch there. When talking IDP, it's the fact that McLeod has been playing suboptimally that gives me some thoughts that he could be a good DB3 or flex, depending on how deep you roll in your IDP league, just because he's going to be targeted. He's going to be given the opportunities to get those passes defensed and or the pass breakups, and the tackles outside of what he would normally get playing closer to the line of scrimmage. So he's definitely an upside play this week. Jordan Hicks, not Jordan Hicks, Eric Kendricks and Jordan Hicks, linebacker for the Vikings, are both in play this week, especially against this running game of the Colts. Harrison Smith, I do not know if he is back from the concussion protocol. I believe he is.
I read that he was supposed to be back, but I'm happy to be corrected on that.
That's good. If for some reason he is not back, Josh Martellus came in last week for the Vikings, who he played very well at free safety earlier in the year. Well, he got thrust into the strong safety role last week, was very productive for IDP purposes. So just keep an eye on that. If Harrison Smith goes down, look for Martellus to be somebody to add to your defensive back spot. Over for Indianapolis, I talked about Rodney McLeod. With that interior of the offensive line for the Colts, you just mentioned, the center may or may not be at full strength. Obviously, DeForest Buckner has a good matchup this week at the interior. Zaire Franklin, I think those are your key takeaways right there in terms of players you definitely are starting. So it's going to be a fun matchup. I think it's going to be more of a, it's at 47.5. It has the highest over under of the day. And if I'm looking at it correctly, I believe it has the highest point total for the weekend. So this could really be a fun game to watch here for a lot of fantasy managers.
And Jeff Saturday coaching on a Saturday. What more could you want? I don't know what analytics you want to take from that, but has it ever happened before? I don't
know. We got questions here from DJ Duvernay on YouTube. What's going on, man? Got a rough quarterback situation today. Ravens fan, and I got Lamar out, Huntley starting, Watson on the bench. Can't find it in myself to play Deshaun Watson against my guys. Options on the waiver wire: Matt Ryan, Tannehill, Baker, Zach Wilson. We just spent a good 10 minutes or so we're talking about Matt Ryan. Has a great matchup. I mean, you look at the situation here. We mentioned the past 3 weeks, Jared Goff, the Vikings allowed him to get 26.2 points. Mike White, 19.7. Mac Jones posted 20 plus points on this Vikings team. So I think, given the defensive mismatches here for Indianapolis, I think Matt Ryan is a good spot start if you can grab him off of your waiver wire. I think Huntley, you saw last week, more of a commitment to the balanced attack in terms of utilizing these running backs. Obviously, he went out due to injury. But I still think during the time he was playing, you saw more of a balanced attack there versus Pittsburgh. So I would be worried about the upside. Tannehill, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say with Huntley, I guess we're kind of moving on to the next game now anyway, but with Huntley, I'm quietly quite interested in Huntley this week simply because of how poor the Browns have been consistently against the run this year. So they're 30th in defensive rush DVOA. You had Mixon running for something like 7 yards a carry, last week. So I think obviously Dobbins is quite a good play this week. We've kind of seen his usage increase, but this is the upside that Huntley brings. He is kind of a Lamar Jackson light. You know, he that's how they are going to try and win the game is on the ground.
Right.
Huntley offers you that upside. So
That's a good point. That's a very good
don't
point.
mind Huntley this week. I mean, with Watson, it's so. I mean, we've never seen a situation like this,
Right.
so it's really hard to know. I mean, he improved last week, but he couldn't have exactly looked any worse considering that he was playing the Texans the week before. He did look better against the Bengals, but I still think he's going to be really inconsistent this year. I think we're going to see spike weeks and then down weeks for the rest of the year. So Watson isn't someone that I'm going to feel comfortable trusting, even though it is actually quite a good matchup against the Ravens. They have people have got to them through the air. But back to what I was saying, I'm quite interested in Huntley this week.
And you mentioned the susceptibility Cleveland is to the rushing attack. They basically have lost all of their starting linebackers, and they're relying on an aging Deion Jones, who they acquired via trade from the Atlanta Falcons earlier in the year, to be the primary ball or running back stopper, so to speak. So that's a very good point.
And it's kind of one of those things where it's kind of going to be a little bit of luck as to whether it's Huntley getting the rushes or Dobbins getting the rushes, you know, especially around the goal line. I think the upside is there, but it's on the ground because he doesn't really have anyone to throw to bar Mark Andrews.
And not to mention you have the whole thing with Gus Edwards. You know, we look at last week, we look at his touches here. Both of their touches, Dobbins with 15, Gus Edwards with 13. Obviously, Dobbins was the more efficient. He had 8 yards per carry, but a lot of that was taken from that large run. But Dobbins still, had the yardage. He had the touchdowns. You look at the red zone usage inside the 10, inside the 5. It was Dobbins who was getting that. So, it's an interesting situation here for Baltimore. He has another question here. Ride the hot hand with Evan Ingram or play Dulcich in a good matchup. So,
this is really tough.
Do you want to? So, I would say Dulcich if Russell Wilson was the quarterback, but he's not playing this week.
Yeah, because I mean, playing the Cardinals is, I mean, the Cardinals and the Seahawks have just been, they've just been giving up points to the tight end position every single week. They are by far the two best matchups for tight ends. But it's really hard to trust Brett Rippon at quarterback. I mean, how much worse is he than Russell Wilson? But it is. I think I would probably still go Evan Ingram, just because of. I think it's just a safer play for me, and the upside is there because. Yes, he is a tight end, but he's kind of a wide receiver at the same time. I mean, it's not as if he will sort of play all over. So it's a tougher matchup, but I think I'm probably still going Ingram.
Yeah, I agree. The consistency at quarterback here for the Jaguars is what makes me more confident in Ingram. That being the case, I don't think these are great options. You look at fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. Dallas allows the fewest. So it's going to be interesting to see here whether they, scheme some mismatches for Ingram. Last week, he was a beneficiary of the fact that the Titans are just atrocious when it comes to the tight end position. I believe they're allowing the third most fantasy points on the season. So I think that was definitely 100% matchup based. But given the situation, the Cardinals, you bring up a good point. The Cardinals, second most points to the tight end position. Yeah. So if this is Russell Wilson throwing the ball, I would be all over this Dulcich play. I'm a little bit wary here with Brett Rippon throwing the ball. Let's see here. We got another one from David over on Facebook. Welcome, David. He's battled season long with wide receiver position. Let's see here. He thought he had it ready for Mike White until Mike White was declared out. Yeah, dude, you're preaching to the choir. Full PPR, need 2 wide receiver starters. Olave, Wilson, Zay Jones, Drake London, or Jamison Williams. Also, DJ Chark is still an available free agent. You wrote about DJ Chark last week going against the Vikings, so it's interesting. What are your thoughts on him this week going against this Jets secondary? Obviously, it's a little bit more tougher matchup. You think he's somebody that we should consider a matchup-based one last week, or not so much this week, or what are your thoughts?
It's you're going from one of the best matchups in the Vikings, and we saw how Goff had one of his best days as a Lion last week, to then going to one of the tougher matchups. I think the Jets allow something like the third fewest points to wide receivers. So I just don't think there's a much lower likelihood of them giving up a big play like the Vikings did.
Right.
To me, so Olave, I think, has just been too consistent. I know that the quarterback position has been a little bit more ropey for him, but yeah, he's just been too consistent for me to drop. And then I'm probably still going Garrett Wilson, just because again the matchup is really good against the Lions. For me, it's between him and Zay Jones, but I think I'm probably going Olave and Wilson.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you there. Although let me tell you, Keith Fleming, the host of the Daily Fix podcast here on the Fantasy and Frames podcast network, being a diehard Atlanta Falcons fan, has been talking up Desmond Ridder left and right. Look, obviously you're not trusting a rookie making his first start in the fantasy football playoffs. So
also Keith is a little bit biased.
A bit, and he wouldn't recommend.
I mean, he might be right, but he's
and don't get me wrong. If you listen to the podcast, definitely download it today, and or watch the stream over on YouTube at our YouTube channel. Which, by the way, head over there and rate, subscribe. We definitely appreciate your patronage there. I think it's. I know it's going to be Olave. He's proven that whether it's either quarterback there in New Orleans, he's definitely a must start. Garrett Wilson. Well, this first of all tanks Elijah Moore with Zach Wilson being the quarterback. I think so. I think Garrett Wilson is definitely the best option here in terms of talented situation. There is some, I don't want to say there's chemistry, but there is some familiarity with Zach Wilson there.
Yeah, and Corey Davis is out as well, and it's a great matchup against the Lions. We've seen how the Lions have just been, destroyed all year, defensively. So the more I think about it, the more I'm kind of more confident in those two.
All right, well there you go, David. We got Olave and Garrett Wilson for you. Good luck this week. Let us know how you do. Let's see here. We got DJ back here on the YouTube. Are you benching ETN for a guy like David Montgomery, considering a tough matchup and a rough last few weeks due to game script? Well, game script should be on his side here. Dallas is no joke when it comes to the running back position or their defense as a whole. Everybody in the NFC likes to talk about San Francisco, rightfully so. San Francisco is the best defense, I want to say, in the NFC and possibly of all of football. Dallas isn't so bad either, especially up front. So, you have Parsons, who's an athletic freak who can get out there and make tackles on the edge. You got Van Der Esch, who's been playing well. You have these safeties, which have been playing super close to the line of scrimmage. They're basically de facto linebackers. Go figure. They're adding help to their weakest area. That could spell trouble for Etienne. Montgomery, back to week 13 at 14 attempts for 61 yards, 4.4 yards per carry, and a touchdown. When you look at red zone opportunities, he got you 2 opportunities there for a touchdown. Philadelphia, I believe, is going to pose obviously a much more difficult matchup than Green Bay did. The real question here we got to ask ourselves is how much is Justin Fields going to be thrown into the fire here? Like, this is going to be another week removed from his injury that he had. I think it was a shoulder injury that kept him out at least a week. and whether or not they get him. I think Justin Fields is going to have a great game. I think he's going to, for fantasy purposes, he's going to be the, it's kind of cool in the sense that very similar offenses in the sense of like, what this is going to be based on. It's going to be based on the running game, and the quarterbacks are going to play a huge role in that.
Yeah, and because on paper it looks like a really bad matchup for Fields, and this is what I wrote about in the starts and sits, that I just can't bring myself to sit someone like Justin Fields when you know that he is going to run the ball. He's run for 60 yards, I think, in each of his last 6 or 7 games or something like that, and scoring a touchdown in most of those games. So, yeah, I mean, I also wrote about ETN as a sit this week. I don't particularly like either of them because ETN has you've seen the efficiency fall off. You've seen the Jags kind of put more onto Lawrence, and it's worked as well. So you saw him against Baltimore. You saw him last week as well. Just he's playing really well, and ETN also isn't seeing that many targets. So this is really, really tough between the two. I can also see from a later comment that he's also got Deonta Foreman. I'm not a huge fan of Deonta Foreman this week either, but I think that might be the safer option.
Yeah, you saw Chuba come in last week, and obviously he got his touches. But if Foreman is, back to being 100%, I think that's probably. I agree. I think,
and also because look at how the Panthers played last week with Sam Darnold there. They just kind of established the run and kept with it, and they said we kind of know that Sam Darnold can't throw the ball, so we're just going to keep running. And obviously that was against the Seahawks, and it worked. But I think that's going to be how they're going to try and play. Whether it works or not is a different question because it is a slightly tougher matchup.
You look at Pittsburgh; their linebackers are in flux. Like none of them are playing close to 100%. Well, Devin Bush, I believe, who wears the green dot, is playing close to 100%. But Miles Jack, I think he was reduced to 55%. So there's some rotations going on in that linebacking core for Pittsburgh. So
I think, to me, kind of none of the three have a kind of any real high upside. But I think Foreman, to me, probably offers the safest floor.
Okay.
But the three are all fairly close to me.
Okay. We got Justin here on Facebook. Thank you very much. I think this is the first time you've tuned into our show, Justin. I could be wrong, but if so, welcome. He's asking Tannehill, Ritter, Wilson, or Matt Ryan. I like Matt Ryan this week. We just went over him a little bit earlier. If you head over to fantasyandframes.com, our website, we have a multitude of articles that come out every single week. And then we have one called Chasing Upside, where we talk about positional players that have the upside to exceed their Fantasy Pros weekly ranking there. And Matt Ryan, for me, he's my quarterback 14. I like his upside here. Obviously, with the question you're asking, Tannehill, Ritter, Wilson, or Ryan, something went wrong at quarterback, whether it was an injury.
Could be a Kyler Murray situation.
Or Lamar or something. Yeah. This week, Matt Ryan, I think he has a great matchup this week. Again, it has the highest over-under. So give me Matt Ryan. Got Corey here on YouTube. Welcome, Corey. He said Tua, Matt Ryan, or Daniel Jones. Here's the thing. He said Justin says he had Lamar. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Going back to Corey's question here, again, Matt Ryan, I think he has the best matchup here. Daniel Jones, here's the thing with Daniel Jones. If you actually look back at this Washington game, yeah, by hook or crook, he got you 17 points, 17.1, 17.3 around there. I'm guessing. If memory serves me correctly, which I think it is. You're hoping for the scrambling upside. There's the potential for Chase Young to return in this matchup, which could be advantageous for the defensive line. It's nothing. He's not been ruled out. Normally by this time every week, it's like, the Washington media, which I listen to every single day driving to and from work, is like, oh, well, he's close, but he's not close. A lot of misdirection, and it ultimately ends in like just nothing happening. Here they said here's a good shot that he could play. Maybe that's a bit strong. This has been the closest they've been to somewhat positive that he could play. whatever you can take whatever you want from that. If that's the case, I think this defensive line for Washington is going to get after Daniel Jones, and that could severely limit his upside. So I would pay attention to the Chase Young news. That being the case, you look at Tua going to Buffalo. The weather reports in Buffalo are already saying it's going to be at least 3 feet of snow. What does that do for a player? That I feel like when you get an inclement weather type of game, immediately your offense shifts to the running back situation and letting them kind of control the game here. So I don't know. I'm still sticking with Matt Ryan. I think he's going to have a great game today. What about you, Jonathan?
Yeah, this is really tough because you look at it and Tua, until the last 2 weeks, has just been a really consistent starter for you. Obviously, he's had some really boom games, but it's over the last 2 weeks that, like, you look at how defenses are sort of matching up against him, and they're trying to take away that middle of the field.
Mm-hmm.
That had worked so well for them for the first sort of 10, 12 games.
Right.
That if the Bills have watched the last 2 games, which I imagine they have, they're going to try and do the same sort of thing.
Right.
And it's about whether then Mike McDaniel can scheme around that and look at how they can sort of counteract that. But given the last 2 weeks plus the weather, I don't feel comfortable putting Tua in there. I think there's a good chance that he ends with like single-digit points. So it's tough, but I think I'm probably going Matt Ryan as well.
Right. I mean,
but I certainly wouldn't blame you if you still wanted to go Tua, given how well he has done this year. And it, if we kind of get to later in the day and it looks like the weather isn't going to be as bad,
right.
then
that's a good point.
Yeah, then I would probably go with Tua.
Yeah, so definitely pay attention to the weather reports leading up to the 1 o'clock kickoff here for Indy and Minnesota. That's definitely your telltale sign there. David says thank you. Justin says thank you. No, thank you. Thank you all for showing up early on a Saturday morning to get your fantasy football fix for the first slate of games for the fantasy football playoffs. Let's go to our 4:30 game next. We got the Ravens going to Cleveland. We alluded to Tyler Huntley earlier and that the rushing upside could be there just because the defense has been poor for Cleveland in terms of shutting down the run. J.K. Dobbins, this is an interesting one to talk about. Like, did he look normal to you last week?
I know that a few people have mentioned it. It was the breakaway run.
Yes.
Where, like, it's last year, he scores a touchdown. And you know that he's not quite 100%.
Right.
But, I mean, he's coming off, he had a serious injury last year and, he's then had injury problems this year. So
right.
We shouldn't expect him to be at 100%, but that still doesn't mean that you should sort of stay away from him because, as we said, this is a really good matchup. And if he saw, something like 15, 18 touches last week, something like that, I think we can probably expect a similar sort of output again today. And I wouldn't be surprised if he does sort of tear off another long run with that matchup. So yeah, I really like Dobbins today.
A question I got over on TikTok, which, by the way, if you haven't, head over to our TikTok page. We've been posting content on that. Follow us there. Somebody was asking me about Mark Andrews and what are our realistic expectations for Mark Andrews. He's been kind of, a dud for most of the season. Let me tell you, going back to last season when Huntley took over as the quarterback, just how well Mark Andrews has performed. Going back weeks 14 through 18, 115 yards, 136 yards, 125 yards, 89 yards, 85 yards. 23 points, 30.6, 22.5, 11.9, 12.5, and half PPR scoring. It was this chemistry, this run of Mark Andrews that made him in the discussion for being the tight end 1 in drafts this year.
Yep.
And it wasn't Lamar Jackson throwing the ball. It was Tyler Huntley. I think he has, if there was going to be a Mark Andrews, return to form game, I think it's going to be this one versus Cleveland.
Because we haven't had like a really huge, he's someone that I took quite a lot of in draft in the summer, and he had some good games to start with, but I don't think he scored a touchdown since something like week 6 or week 7.
Right.
So we just haven't had that really high upside game from him in a while. And I think you're right that it could well be this week.
The person on TikTok also said that he has Freiermuth on his bench. If you had to say Freiermuth or Mark Andrews this week, who are you rolling the dice with if you had to make that decision?
I'm still going Andrews. I think, given the lack of weapons there, that he's going to see targets. That there should be a really safe floor there, and I'm rightly or wrongly, I'm someone that will stick with these guys just because we know what the upside is, and I would rather not have them on the bench when they blow up. Right. So yeah, I'm still going with Andrews there.
You mentioned the targets again, going back last year with Huntley as a quarterback, 11 targets, 13, 10, 6, 16. I mean, we're basically reliving 2021 down the stretch for the Baltimore Ravens in terms of offensive weapons here. On the flip side, David Njoku is a man amongst boys at the tight end position. He is somebody who just whenever David Njoku is healthy, you're putting him in your tight end spot and you're walking away and you're setting it and forget it. It's hands down. So we talked about the Ravens players. Let's talk about the Cleveland Browns here. Obviously, we mentioned Deshaun Watson, too inconsistent to even think about being considered as an option here. But we did see Stefanski, the head coach, come out this week and say he wants to see Deshaun throw the ball downfield more. Donovan Peoples-Jones, I think people are really sleeping on him. He's been a hot name for the diehard fans, for the more casual fantasy football fans. I don't think you all realize just how good he's been. Let's go back here. He had a stretch from week 6 through week 11 where he had at minimum 60 yards receiving. He had, averaging about 5.5 receptions, was getting you, close to 6 targets a game. Last week against Cincinnati, he blew up for 114 yards, got you 15.4 half PPR points on 12 targets, 8 receptions. He's definitely somebody who, if you have a large league, what do I mean by large? Maybe a 12-teamer with an extra flex spot or a 14-teamer, and you have him available on your roster, I'm chucking him in there. I think he has
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's just been really consistent. He was that period. He was just giving you 10 to 15 points in. I've got him in a Dynasty league, full PPR, and he was just giving me 10 to 15 points every week. And the only thing that's been lacking, and probably the reason why people aren't talking about him, is because he's not scoring touchdowns.
2 touchdowns. Yeah.
I think he scored 1 this year. I think that's it.
Yeah, that's it. That's the only one he scored.
So last week we kind of saw people talking about it a little bit more, just because he had something like 8 receptions for over 100 yards.
114. Yep.
Yeah. So the worry. Look, this is it's a good matchup for a passing attack. We saw Trubisky throw for 270 yards last week. I looked this up. It was his best. It was the most amount of yards he's thrown since like the end of 2018 or something like that. He's like, if Trubisky can throw for 270 yards, it's a very good matchup. The problem is you've got 3 options there. You've got Amari Cooper, you've got Donovan Peoples-Jones, and you've got Njoku. So all 3 of those are in play.
Right.
But I don't think all 3 will
Feast.
Provide you with a really good fantasy day. So at the end of the day, it's probably just going to be a little bit of luck that you pick the right one. Because we saw Donovan Peoples-Jones, and I don't believe he had a great day against the Texans. And we didn't like Amari Cooper was quiet last week. So with Deshaun Watson playing the way he is, I struggle to see how all 3 can have a really good day.
Right. I guess my only, I'm looking at the metrics here for these receivers last week in week 13 versus Houston. We look at yards per reception. Amari Cooper was, 10 yards per reception.
Mhm.
Donovan Peoples-Jones, 14.7. The head coach comes out this week and says he wants Deshaun to throw the ball downfield more. If you need if you're banking on a big play here for this matchup, I think that's where I'm leaning DPJ. If you're okay with a medium floor, obviously you roll with Amari here and hope for the Amari Cooper upside.
Yeah, and I was going to just a side note. I think Donovan Peoples-Jones is a great buy in Dynasty at the moment because the name value isn't there yet, but the production is. And yeah, so yeah, I think we'll see this passing attack improve next year. So I think he's a interesting name to watch for the future as well.
I'll switch over to the IDP side of the ball here. Look, let's start with Baltimore. Ever since the Roquan Smith trade, Patrick Queen has been, resurgent. Doesn't even begin to describe just how well he's played. Going back, let me pull up his stats real quick. Real quick, I mean really slowly. Going back, we're talking about 12 tackles, 8 tackles, 9 tackles, 8 tackles making plays in coverage, whether it's passes deflected or interceptions, using Fantasy Pro scoring since week 11, 20 points, close to 12, close to 15, 14. Both him and Roquan can eat in this linebacking core. I currently have Roquan Smith as my LB2 for the week over at Fantasy and Frames, and I have Queen at 7. You have this rushing attack for Cleveland. They're going to emphasize the running game with both Hunt and Nick Chubb. So there's no reason why both of these guys can't eat and get you good production this week for the Ravens. On the flip side, for Cleveland, we talked about the susceptibility of them to the running game, which makes Deion Jones a decent floor play this week. I'm not going to say ceiling, but definitely a decent floor play. Probably an LB3, LB2. Nate wrote about him over in our Chasing IDP Upside article over at fantasyandframes.com. So definitely check that out this week. Obviously, you're starting Myles Garrett, edge rusher here. But aside from that, that's kind of those are the players I'm most confident in for IDP purposes in this matchup. So with that, let's get into our final game to discuss here. And of course, folks, if you have more start and sit questions, send them our way. And of course, if you don't have any questions for today, and I start thinking about your lineup decisions, again, as we do every Sunday, starting at 9:30 a.m. Eastern, we have our fantasy football pregame show where we cover the rest of the games on the docket. And just to give you a heads up, this is going to be the norm going forward for the rest of the fantasy football playoffs. We have, I think, games in every Saturday leading up through the playoffs. So you're going to get a pregame show on Saturday. You're going to get a pregame show on Sunday. So more opportunities to check out our stuff, as well as really head over to fantasyandframes.com and check out these articles. Fantastic work. That being the case, we know your time's valuable. If you're not a big fan of going through the articles, I get it. Attention spans are what they are. We summarize them on our Instagram posts. We summarize them on our TikTok. We summarize them on our YouTube shorts. So a lot of places to go get our content. And of course, we'll answer all of your questions as they come in. 8:15, Miami, Buffalo tonight. 3 feet of snow projected. What the hell do we do?
I don't know. There's one league where I've managed to get a buy, and it's largely because I have Tua. It's a super flex. I've got Tua and Tyreek, and I'm just so glad that I got the buy and don't have to rely on these two tonight, because it's just it's just so hard to predict what it's actually going to look like. It's a really, really tough decision for people to make, because I think someone like Tyreek is fine. He's been seeing consistent targets despite the offense not looking like it has. Tyreek's actually still been great, but you just don't know what Tua is going to look like and how they change the offense to kind of to counteract the weather.
Right. On the flips, so in terms of running back situation, let's get into that because I think I talked about earlier. When you have inclement weather and this amount of snow, I don't think we've seen this amount of snow in a Buffalo game since the LaShawn McCoy game years ago, where he just
I
went
was going
off.
to say it feels like they should just get him back, literally just for this game. Like,
Just what?
it doesn't seem right if there's like a snow game and Shady McCoy isn't there.
Yeah, not even like a full day contract. You get a half a day contract, whatever
Yeah.
that monetary value is.
A 4-hour contract.
We look at the running backs here and the names that you're thinking about, obviously for Buffalo, are Raheem Mostert. No, that's not who you're thinking for Buffalo. Sorry, Devin Singletary and James Cook. You go back to Week 13 versus New England. Both had 13, 14 touches. Both had similar yardage, 64-51. Cook just happened to be the more efficient one there with 4.6 yards per carry compared to the 3.9. Singletary, however, got you the touchdown. You go back to Week 14. It was Singletary with 8 attempts for 39 yards, 4.9 yards per carry. Was included more in the receiving game against the Jets, a tough defensive matchup here. I'm leaning Singletary. I know James Cook has been kind of the hot hand here, but I just feel like Singletary is being used a lot still in between the 20s here. The bad weather makes me weary of the passing game outside of like Stephon Diggs. I just feel like this is one of those games where, I think, is the division on the line here? The division lead on the line here? I can't recall off the top of my head.
I think,
or maybe they're just...
Miami must be one game back.
Okay. So obviously, this is going to be a highly contested game here. Bad weather conditions. I just see Singletary getting those rushing attempts and goal line work there over James Cook. On the flip side, for Miami, since coming back from injury, it's been the Raheem Mostert show here. We go back to Week 13, and you look at his touches. Obviously, Jeff Wilson was injured or coming back from injury there in that game. 7 rushing attempts, 30 yards, 4.3 versus San Francisco, his old team, which, going against the 49ers and posting that kind of yardage total and that efficiency, kind of impressive. The fact that he was so successful last week, had 11 rushing attempts compared to Wilson's 4, 37 yards. He was also targeted in the receiving game.
So Wilson was injured. I'm not sure what the injury was, but he's supposed to be questionable coming into today. I think it's a game time decision. Even if he's playing, I'm struggling to trust Jeff Wilson at the moment. I think this is more of a Mostert game than a Wilson game. And just back to the playoff picture, Miami are 2 games back, so it's
okay.
I mean, it's obviously still a very big game. Back to the Bills running back. James Cook has just been way too inconsistent to actually trust him, especially in the fantasy playoffs. I think Singletary doesn't offer you a whole lot of upside, but he offers you a much safer floor than James Cook. Cook's looked okay, but he hasn't been seeing consistent touches throughout the week. You've got kind of had a couple of weeks where he's seen 5 touches, and then others where he's seen sort of 10 to 15. It's a tough one to trust in the fantasy playoffs.
A player that people are kind of scratching their heads on here for Miami is Jalen Waddle. Like, where has Jalen Waddle gone? I mean, since week 12 and half PPR scoring, he's only got you 1.4 points and 4.1 points. Not optimal. I do like the fact that this Bills secondary is allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game to the wide receivers. That is definitely helpful there. Tyreek Hill, obviously, I think he's going to get emphasized the most downfield. That being the case, I think the short to intermediate, especially during these weather conditions for Tua and him wanting to get the ball out quickly, and we'll get to why when we talk about the IDPs for this. I think that's going to favor Jalen Waddle. I think Jalen Waddle is going to get those intermediate targets, just get funneled there. And so for the PPR and half PPR crowd, I think that's a very good play, a very good wide receiver /2 flex play this week. What are your thoughts on Jalen Waddle, Jonathan?
Yeah, it's really tough because he's someone that you feel as though you can't bench unless you've got ridiculous options, because the upside is just astronomical every single week. And as you said, they're going to need to get the ball out quickly. I mean, we saw what happened to Mike White last week, and so that's going to be what Buffalo's going to try and do to Tua. Try and disrupt him. So he's going to need to get the ball out quickly. I mean, what's interesting is that this kind of downturn in the Miami offense over the last couple of weeks hasn't really, as I said before, hasn't really affected Tyreek Hill. He's seen something like 24 targets over the last 2 weeks. But with Waddle, I think he's only seen something like 3 receptions. I would expect a slight uptick because I don't think, as you said, the secondary isn't as good. But it's just one of those where you kind of just got to temper expectations now. He's not a clear wide receiver, like a top 12 wide receiver in fantasy. It's kind of he's like a wide receiver 2 now, top 24 rather than top 12.
Right. On the flip side, the Bills just signed Cole Beasley out. They got him out of retirement with the same rationale with a short intermediate for Waddle. I like that for Isaiah McKenzie. Obviously, I don't think Cole Beasley is going to step into obviously this game out of all the games. So I think Isaiah McKenzie could be a interesting play here if you need a flex.
How do you feel about Gabe Davis? Because he's one that is just been so difficult to trust. I was looking; he's only had 1 double-digit game in half PPR scoring in the last 7 games.
Yeah.
So that ridiculous upside that we were kind of talking about at the start of the season and before the season,
right.
It just doesn't seem to be there on a consistent basis anymore.
I think people, I think President Company included, so speaking for myself, we look at the opportunities he had last year, but let's face it, recency bias is a very huge thing for everybody in every facet of life. And what was the most recent thing we saw him do? We saw him light up the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, Josh Allen's got a great arm. He's an MVP candidate. Oh, Diggs is really good. Well, if they pressure Diggs, Gabe Davis to the rescue. And
the fact that they didn't bring anyone else in, like in the draft, or there wasn't as if there was like someone else there that was going to kind of challenge him for the number 2 spot.
Yeah, it's So to answer your question, I will cheer for Gabe Davis if he scores a touchdown. I don't, I'm a fan of his big play work. I will be pissed if I insert him into my lineup and he puts up a dud, and I'm not willing to take that gamble, so to speak. Those are my thoughts on Gabe Davis.
Yeah, same. It's just what's interesting is that he will. It's not as if he's only seeing like 1 or 2 targets and they're like, and he's just not catching them. He's actually seeing targets, but it's just we're not seeing those big plays. It's but the matchup on paper, sort of ignoring the weather, looks quite good. I mean, Miami have given up something like 600 yards to receiving yards in the last 2 weeks. We saw Herbert play really, really well last week, but it just seems too difficult to. It's tough to trust someone like Gabe Davis. At the moment,
I'd rather play, for example, Alec Pierce for the Colts than Gabe Davis this week. That's my level of comfort there. Switching to the other side of the ball, let's start with Miami. Jalen Phillips, edge rusher, definitely a play. We look back on his performance. If I can pull up the right tab here, the past few weeks, going back to week 12, 7 tackles, a TFL, sack versus the 49ers. 3 tackles, half a sack. Last week versus the Chargers, got back to form. 6 tackles, 2 tackles for a loss, and a sack. I mean, the guy plays just lights out. So definitely somebody that I could say you could roll in as a defensive lineman if he's defensive lineman eligible. DL 2/3. A player that Nate to say that Nate has been not a fan of for the majority of the season has been Jerome Baker of the Miami Dolphins linebacker. He just hasn't done anything. He just hadn't done anything except you look back now, the past 3 weeks, he didn't really do anything in the tackle department. He got you 4 tackles, but he got you a sack. And then you're like, all right, that's positive. I guess it's better than what it had been, right? You go back to week 13 versus San Francisco in a run-heavy matchup, 11 tackles, a tackle for a loss, half a sack. All right, well, that's better. That's better. Going against a Chargers team where they were throwing it and running it. Again, another 11 tackle performance, 2 tackles for a loss, and a sack. All right, so now you have this bad weather game where, they're going to be running the ball a lot, where they're probably going to be limited in terms of what they could do on offense, and the offensive line can only hold out for so much. Jerome Baker, he's an LB3, and I'm pretty confident that he could produce LB3 value for your team. Where do I have Jerome Baker currently ranked? I have him at 36. So that's right out there, right literally on the cusp of LB3 territory. So, I like the play this week given the whole situation in Buffalo. For the Bills, I wrote about him in my IDP start article, which you can see over fantasyandframes.com. Greg Rousseau and this defensive line for the Bills just utterly annihilated Mike White. Did you? By the way, going off tangent for a second, did you? Do you remember? Did you know that Mike White last week went to 10 different doctors trying to get him to clear him to play this week versus Detroit? Like the team doctor's like, no, you are definitely not healthy enough. He's like, all right, I'll go to 10 more doctors.
Just to find one.
Yeah, no, seriously. Like the dedication of this guy trying to get on the field, notwithstanding, got the crap kicked out of him last week, is where my point is going there.
Yeah, it's what Keith was, I know, was mentioning it on the Daily Fix about how much he wants to play just so that he doesn't potentially lose his job. I mean, he's looked really good, and I think he's an unrestricted free agent at the end of this year. So he's playing for a contract, and he's played well enough to get a good contract next year, whether that's with the Jets or with someone else. I think there's a good chance that Mike White gets a good contract and competes for a starting job next year, given how well he's looked in these games. And that's what he's actually playing for. It's like a multi-million-dollar contract. You can see why he wants to get out there, especially with this matchup against the Lions.
No, totally. We look at going back to Rousseau here, he had a great outing last week. Should be lining up against right tackle Brandon Shell, since Tua is left-handed. That's the guy who's protecting his blind spot. Since week 11, has allowed 10 pressures and a sack. He's one of the lowest graded offensive linemen in all of football, according to Pro Football Focus. That just tells me Rousseau is going to have a monster matchup. Matt Milano, Tremaine Edmonds, linebackers pretty high on. Jordan Poyer, high on. DeMar Hamlin, given the fact that I don't know how much of a downfield threat this offense is going to be for Miami, I'm kind of worried about his upside, given again the whole weather situation there. But aside from that, those are the players that I'm happy about. I can't tell if this is spam or this is real, because I don't go to the park because there are no real parks around me. So I don't know what you're saying, Maria, if you are in fact a real person. So I'm just going to leave that alone.
I'm going to guess it not.
The park. Could we be more specific here? Here we go. We got a question from Brock Hershey. Of course, Brock, you can ask a question. What question do you have for us today? We're waiting for him to send in his question here. Yeah, that's going to wrap up, our Saturday pregame show. We'll wait for you, Brock, here. We talked about the Colts and the Vikings. We talked about the Ravens and the Browns, and we just finished up Miami and Buffalo. Like I said, head over to fantasyandframes.com, read Jonathan's start and sit article, read my IDP start article, read our staff's article on upside plays, read our stat. Wow, another. Do you like silk? Really, Brock? That's the question. Okay, we're getting some spammers, definitely, which, hey, what are you going to do? Anyhow, our IDP Chasing Upside, Nate Markham did a great job of that. And also, folks, let's not forget, over on Instagram, we're partnering with Roto Underworld /Player Profiler for the remainder of the season, talking about some choice plays in IDP. So check out those graphics over there, as well as check out all of our graphics that we take basically our articles, and we give you a sneak peek of that on Instagram, as well as on YouTube Shorts and on TikTok at Fantasy and Frame. So head over to all our social media. We really appreciate it. Even if it's a follow, especially if it's a follow, we would definitely appreciate that. But head over to our website, look at all our all of our rankings. These comments are hilarious on the YouTube chat now at this point.
I think that's our cue to leave.
Yeah, exactly. We did it for an hour. So thank you very much, folks, for tuning in. Good luck this week in your matchups. And again, tomorrow morning, 9:30 a.m. Eastern, here on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, we will have our pregame show for the rest of the weekend. So for Jonathan, I'm Jorge. Y'all have a good one. We got one more question. It's a real question.
Oh, it's a real one.
Garrett Wilson or
We've
Terry
got a live
McLaurin?
one.
Yeah. Terry McLaurin can run any route he wants against the New York Giants, and that's when James Bradbury was their top corner. I don't see why Terry McLaurin can't have upside this week. I trust Heineke. I trust the Heineke McLaurin connection. Then I do Zach Wilson and Garrett Wilson. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, this is really tough because the matchup for Wilson looks amazing on paper. If this was Mike White, I'd be saying Wilson, because we've seen how poor Detroit have been and how many points they're allowing this year. But given that it's Zach Wilson, I just feel more comfortable putting in Terry McLaurin. I think that's the safer play for me. But again, if someone wanted to argue for Garrett Wilson, I wouldn't. I could certainly see the argument given that matchup.
All right, well, there you go. Well, thanks, folks. And again, head over to fantasyandframes.com, and we will see you tomorrow.